Hello, everyone. My name is Daniel Schoonmaker. I'm the Executive Director of the West Michigan Sustainable Business Forum, and which is the facilitator of the Lakeshore Sustainability Forum, and the host of our presentation today with Congressman Bill Huizenga. This is the first in our series of legislative forums highlighting the intersection of community resilience and business prosperity, and how that is being presently impacted by concerns from extreme weather events, the COVID-19 pandemic, and the disproportionate impacts of racial inequality. I'd like to welcome Congressman Bill Huizenga, our representative for the second district, and I'm going to hand over the screen to allow him to make some introductory remarks.
All right, Daniel, thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to be with you, and I know that Zoom, Teams, whatever, all the platforms that are out there, this has become part of our new normal as we all try to do business and figure out how this all works. And it's a new day in many different ways with what has been going on. So the opportunity to talk about resilience in the Great Lakes is an important subject, and I constantly talk about how both the economy and the ecology of the Great Lakes need to be utilized properly, protected properly, because they don't oppose each other if done properly. They actually complement each other. And we can have both a robust economy and a robust ecology to the Great Lakes. So I know for those of us who live in West Michigan, it's hard to imagine summer without being on the shores or being on the lake, whether it's the big lake, and by the way, only in Michigan can you say the big lake and like everybody knows what you're talking about. But whether it's on the big lake or whether it's on an inland lake, as I was this weekend, both on Spring Lake and in Lake Muskegon, that's where we recreate. That's where we go to build friendships and family, and that's an important part. And you try to describe that to people who aren't familiar with it, and they literally just kind of scratch their heads. And one of my favorite stories, I'll make it real quick, but I had a colleague from Texas, very well educated, world traveler, spoke 4 languages, had 2 law degrees, one from France, one from the US. He was an amazing guy, and his name is Kiko. And I had Kiko up here to speak in West Michigan a number of years ago. And I brought him to a place on Lake Michigan where he was going to stay overnight. And I said, I'll be by to pick you up in the morning, about 8 o'clock, and then we're going to hit the road again. Well, 7 o'clock, my phone rings, and it's Kiko. And I'm like, oh, he needs something. Maybe, he can't figure out how the coffee maker works or whatever it might be. And I said, hey, Kiko, everything okay? And he said, what am I looking at? I said, oh, I don't know. What do you mean? He goes, this body of water. What am I looking at? I said, well, that's Lake Michigan. And there was this pause, and he said, where's the other side? and he knew exactly what the Gulf Coast looked like. He had lived in California. He had lived on the East Coast. He had lived internationally, but he had never been to Michigan. And so when we talk about the importance of Lake Michigan and the impact it has on us, both positively and negatively, we sometimes have to get better at telling that story to the rest of the country. So that's one of my goals and objectives. I've been very pleased that we have been able to, over the last number of years, build a very robust, bipartisan, bicameral group that has worked on Great Lakes issues. Marcy Captor and I have become very good friends and work very closely on these issues as co-chairs of the Great Lakes Task Force. That has been a wonderful partnership, and those are the kinds of things I think that as we come together and again acknowledge that both the ecology and the economy are important aspects of what we need to deal with, we can get some things done. So I think that's enough of a introductory conversation, but just pleased to be with you and appreciate the opportunity.
Wonderful. Thank you so thank you so much. And on that note, I'd like to introduce Kathy Evans. Kathy is the oh, go ahead, Kathy. I was going to say you are the Environmental Program Manager for the West Michigan Shoreline Regional Development Commission and the Muskegon Lake Watershed Partnership. And Kathy is going to share some thoughts about the rehabilitation of Muskegon Lake and how that was and the role that the federal leadership has taken in that.
Well, thank you. And thank you for inviting me to be part of this forum. And I first want to thank Congressman Huizenga for your support of the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative and all your work on the Great Lakes Task Force. Very appreciated. And we love it when you come to Muskegon. And it was great to see you here when we celebrated the cleanup of the former Zephyr oil refinery nearly 2 years ago. And we're about to start on another Legacy Act project. In fact, it will be our final for Muskegon Lake to get us delisted as one of the Great Lakes areas of concern. That will be our fourth and final Legacy Act cleanup, which is actually getting underway right now.
That's great. As I don't mean to interrupt, but just yesterday, Todd Whiteman, who is my new district director, he and I drove past the Zephyr site yesterday on our way back from some meetings up in Ludington and Shelby area. So I was able to recount that whole story of what has been happening around Muskegon Lake and the cleanup. I mean, it's such a success story. It's a great story to be telling.
Yeah, and I don't know if I can tell it as well as I should be able to because I feel very immersed in the day-to-day details of it. I have to get my major talking points together probably, but being involved in this cleanup of Muskegon Lake for many years, you know, I've seen the changes in the community and the changes in the mindset that people have about Muskegon Lake, understanding now that actually cleanup and restoration is possible when you have a resource that was so severely degraded as we did in Muskegon Lake. So the GLRI is very important. Back before we had the GLRI, just before we had the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act funding through NOAA, through the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and we were awarded a $10 million grant to the Great Lakes Commission Regional Partnership with NOAA. So our office was a subrecipient of that grant, and we managed restoration along the shoreline of Muskegon Lake. And that's in addition to the sediment cleanups that were already starting to be planned and underway, that were also needed to remove the toxic substances from the bottom of the lake. So this was more shoreline, fish and wildlife habitat restoration, shallow water habitat restoration. We removed, you know, sawmill debris from the lumber era at many locations that were just choking off the bottom of the lake, harming the fishery. And the shoreline itself had been so degraded with, you know, everything but the kitchen sink. And I'm talking old foundry slag and, you know, building materials from demolitions and broken concrete. So the shoreline was never a place people really wanted to go in Muskegon Lake for many generations, and we're told basically don't go there, it's not safe. So now we're struggling with how do we change that perception and get the community more connected to their own waterfront. But when we were able to implement the $10 million Recovery Act funds through NOAA, we removed across 24.7 acres the unnatural historical fill. We restored it to wetlands. We repaired and softened about 1.9 miles of Muskegon Lake shoreline, which is, you know, roughly 5 miles as the crow flies from Muskegon River to Lake Michigan. But if you count the actual shoreline and the configuration of the shoreline, you're probably more like an 8-mile shoreline. So we were able to get 1.9 miles softened with that initial investment. And as part of that, Dr. Paul Isley with Grand Valley State University did do a study to measure some of the social and economic benefits of that first $10 million project. And that study found that the $10 million project would generate nearly $60 million of economic benefits for Muskegon area over a 20-year period, or a 6-to-1 return on the investment. And the economic benefits included a $12 million increase in property values, up to $600,000 in new tax revenue annually, and over $1 million in new recreational spending annually in Muskegon, and nearly 65,000 additional visitors annually. So, you know, that study was projecting this at the time, and now Dr. Isley has done a revisit that study, new study, and it confirms these benefits. Some of them are even greater, and some of them he has had to take into account the fact that there's been so much more economic development in the downtown area and on the shoreline that changes a little bit about how he calculates these benefits. But yeah, there's no doubt that this restoration of Muskegon Lake has yielded huge economic benefits for our town and for our region in West Michigan. So the high water has impacted the shoreline, and I think probably on Muskegon Lake, following all of this restoration, the worst impacts we've seen are actually on the built environment more so than the softened shoreline. Not that we haven't had some erosion on some of our restored areas, but there's been some real severe damage to the public launches, to some of the seawalled areas where we have marinas or marine operations. And so it's been a real problem for us. And, you know, I worry sometimes because green infrastructure for stormwater management is really the way to move to the future, you know, and we've been doing such good work with low impact development and green infrastructure in the watersheds, but I don't want this high water to end up with a rush to harden everything, because that's just going backwards in taking away what we've achieved with the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative and earlier projects that have done so much restoration and have yielded economic benefits. But one of my top concerns lately is that we have so many public access features that have been closed on Muskegon Lake. And I know this is true for many other communities too, because of the high water. And local jurisdictions, they just don't have the funding to, barely to maintain these anyway, or enhance them, let alone repair them now when there's been some severe damage. And I think one of the things that we'd like to see in Muskegon is to make sure that while all of this is happening, we don't lose our public access spots, because they can be converted. Even if we used public dollars to acquire the land or develop them, there is a conversion process available through the DNR Trust Fund and other methods where they can be converted to other types of development rather than the recreational uses that are there now but may need some help. Most of the economic benefit studies that have been done in the Great Lakes to talk about how the GLRI has resulted in economic benefits have focused on the development of the shoreline in the way of, you know, condominiums or businesses on the shoreline. And I just want to make sure that as we move through this, and development is great, but that we, you know, look at water dependent uses being the most important thing for our waterfront, and that we're also looking at what the neighborhoods, the residents who live there need when it comes to public access. Sometimes we think, you know, it's enough to put in a motorized boat launch, but what about kayakers? What about people who just want to walk along a shoreline? What about people who just want to see a view? It would just be a shame to have all this restoration done and then not have the residents in the communities who are often under resourced and disadvantaged, have them not have the ability to now use this resource to improve their quality of life in their own hometown. So I am working on some of those kinds of projects here in Muskegon to find out more about what local residents really need when it comes to access to the lake. Tourism and visitors are very important, and I think we have some good planning groups and organizations in place to identify how to serve those audiences. But I think we're leaving out the residents a little bit, and we want to make sure that we're really reaching out and finding out what they really do need. And in the case of Muskegon Lake, for generations, they've been told, don't go to the lake. So this is a challenge for us, because some of the residents may not even realize what an asset they have and how much it could improve their quality of life in a very low-cost way, as long as they still have access to this lake and its recreational opportunities. So that's kind of all I wanted to talk about today. I'd be happy to talk more about those subject areas or take questions.
That's great, Kathy. The so Congressman Huizenga, do you have any initial response on how the sorry, seemed like you're about to speak. Okay.
Yeah, well, yeah, I was just going to ask if I
Go
could
ahead.
address a couple of those things. And I know we have a lot of focus on Muskegon Lake, which there should be, but we also have in Muskegon County Mona Lake, which Muskegon Heights has direct access to, and that's always been a challenge of how to utilize that access more within that community. It's divided by I guess the seaway, the highway, divided roadway, and sometimes that's difficult for folks within the community to be able to get there. And so whether it's accessing Mona Lake or whether it's accessing Muskegon Lake, there has been significant changes. And Kathy's absolutely right. When I started working for my predecessor as his district director in 1997, the conditions of the lakes were very different. I think the attitudes of the lakes were very different. And in fact, I myself this weekend spent a good chunk of Sunday afternoon on a boat on Muskegon Lake. And now I'm not so fortunate to own a boat. I do OPB, other people's boats. That's it's way cheaper. I buy a tank of gas every so often for a friend, but just to see how active it was, and to go by the marinas and to go by those access points and to see people kayaking, whether it's on the far end as it's going into the marsh area. That restoration that has happened, those living wetlands are so important to the health of the overall lake, and to be a part of that recovery over the last number of years. And I think that was highlighted in the very beginning of June when EPA Administrator Wheeler came to Muskegon and came to the Grand Valley's Water Resource Institute and announced the reconstitution of the Great Lakes Advisory Board, with Al Steinman being a member of that. And I think that's recognizing the importance of Muskegon and West Michigan and Grand Valley, and frankly of Al and the work that he has done over the last 20 plus years for West Michigan and in West Michigan on the health of the Great Lakes. So I think there's some very exciting things that have been happening. Obviously, when you are able to remove the paper plant and you're able to remove some of those more toxic industrial sites, that puts you leaps and bounds ahead. But now we're at that point of making sure that people understand the health of the lake. That still needs to be improved, yet they're able to use it for whether it's recreational or frankly sustainability for themselves, fishing opportunities and those kinds of things. That's extremely important.
No, and I think we may have time to look back to some specific questions on that later. I'd like to introduce two additional panelists. Roger Cargill, who is who owns a cottage on the lakeshore and has dealt directly with the high water issue, and then Kelly Larson, who is the proprietor of several businesses in the lakeshore area, including Sweet Temptations, Scoops, The Front Porch, and Fortino's. And they're going to tell us a little bit about their experiences with the high water crisis. Roger, and I think you said you have a picture too you'd like to share as well, don't you?
Yeah. So this is so we have a cottage that my grandparents bought the property in the 1940s. They were cherry farmers in Hart. This property's in Mears. This is 6 months apart. My sister enjoying the beach, and then 6 months later, that same beach, the water came up over the top of the rocks that we had and washed it all away. It had a 28-foot walkway going out over the water, and it just picked it up. It was mounted in 1,000 pounds of concrete. It picked it up and threw it on the beach, on the rocks. This is actually my neighbor who elected to, let me just step back. In 2018, I went to my neighbors and said, you know, we got some really high water coming. We got to be prepared for it. So I went to 6 neighbors and said, let's get together and do some protection, because it doesn't matter what you do. It matters what you do as a community. And this neighbor elected not to do it because he built this seawall. And this is some of the minor waves. This is a small storm. Just crushing the seawall. And he didn't want to do any shoreline protection. And 2 months later, it collapsed. And then it took his entire front lawn. It actually took his neighbor's front lawn up to 2 feet away from their cottage. So we purchased, my grandparents bought this in the 40s. My parents built the cottage in the 60s. We've seen the water go high and low. We've seen beach, we've seen high water. This is something we've never seen before. This is pretty traumatic. When my grandparents and my parents had this cottage, there were 2 dunes in front of our cottage and 100 yards of beach. So it wasn't like we built right on the water in a high erosion area. So we went through the processes and got permits. Many people in our area did not, and which was unfortunate. They just did what they wanted to do. And now we have miles and miles and miles of hardened shoreline. That's not a good thing. You know, it doesn't allow, even if the water goes down, it doesn't allow it to regain the shore. So, but we've done what we could and had to do to protect the shoreline. I now have 400 tons of limestone in front of our cottage. I've worked with 2 different contractors. I've worked with one from a barge and a crane that recovered what Mother Nature pulls out every winter. And then another one coming from the land just to armor up the beach, just as all my neighbors did. So if there's anyone that has any questions, I'd be happy to help.
Thank you, Roger. Kelly, would you like to? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, Roger, I just wanted to say I'm intimately familiar with what you and so many of your neighbors have been going through. And late last fall, I had the opportunity to the Coast Guard was kind enough to get me on board a flight with them where we literally flew the entire lake shore from just south of Holland, almost Saugatuck area, all the way up to beyond Ludington. And it's also hard to describe what is happening to folks who, again, aren't familiar with the Great Lakes. And there's a real misperception that it's all just a bunch of rich people from Chicago that are trying to protect their homes. And there are way more of the folks like yourself who are 3rd generation, 4th generation, multi-generational, with small family holdings back, how I described it, back when mere mortals could actually own lakefront, that are really fighting for options. And we've worked very closely with Army Corps of Engineers and Eagle on the state level, International Joint Commission, virtually anybody and everybody that'll listen to us to try to streamline that permitting process to make sure that whatever mitigation may be done is getting done properly. The technology that is out there is changing. Some of that for example, there was technology that was used in the Mississippi River Basin that was the Army Corps would not allow usage in the Great Lakes. It didn't make a whole lot of sense. It had to do with sandbags and things like that. So we're trying to work through that to make sure people have options and the best options possible, rather than just simply putting sheet piling down and trying to protect it that way and with some other methods. But so I appreciate you sharing those photos and that experience. So Kelly, I know you're up next. Sorry, go ahead, Roger.
Sheet pile for a lot of people is the only choice, because EGA won't allow you to encroach into the Great Lakes. So people that are in the collapse zones, don't have any choice. So then all of a sudden we've got increased. It's amazing the number of riptides that we're seeing now compared to what I saw growing up. And I believe that it's all because of what we've done to the shoreline. It's changed a lot of the scope of how the lake reacts to the shore.
So Kelly, would you like to share your experiences with high water as well?
Sure. It's actually a pretty public story. We've been in Temptations. It was built in Chinook Pier in 1984, and this past Christmas, pretty much, we were informed by the city of Grand Haven, who owns the property, that we were all of the tenants in Chinook Pier being evicted because the level of mold was so high that it was not safe to occupy it. And that was a result from some high water. The buildings had these crawl spaces, and if you're familiar with living or being on the water actually comes up from the ground. It doesn't necessarily also have to rise up and flood you. It can flood from the inside. So we did quite a bit of scrambling, and were able to secure a location just down the road in the former depot building, it's still the depot building. So some people have lost, you guys have been in business a long time, it's no big deal, or, and it is a big deal because it's frankly your income and your livelihood. So it's a business that we've put together and built over time. So there were a few other, obviously the 10 other people in there were impacted as well. Some people went out of business, some people moved. So things happened very differently for all of us. And that's supposed to segue me into the question for you, Bill. How is the federal government taking action to address high water impacts, and how do you plan for future impacts?
Great question, Kelly. And for those of you that are not familiar with Temptations, I will attest firsthand, it's excellent. It's a very good product. But I think it's interesting, Kelly, you're hitting kind of the nail on the head here, which is we've got to figure out a way how business is going to be sustainable within this. And this is both a local issue, a state issue, and a federal issue. And as you're pointing out, your tenant or your landlord was the city. And we know that we've been working with the city of Grand Haven on a number of issues that have been affecting that area.
Roadways, for instance.
Yes. Well, and the entire park area that is now flooded. Yep. So there's not just an impact to a business like yours, but there's also the economic impact on tourism and visits, and it is use of those public spaces that have been impacted. But so how do we sort of tackle a few of these things? The House had passed a bill authorizing a program called the Living Shoreline Grant Program. And that is funding state and local projects to stabilize shorelines from high water and erosion. I had an amendment that passed the House that required no less than 10% of whatever those funds would be, with a minimum of it being $5 million, that would go annually to the Great Lakes system. Again, I wanted to make sure that this wasn't just going to the Gulf Coast and the East Coast and the West Coast. I wanted it coming here to the Third Coast and making sure that we were getting some of that attention. What really needs to happen is next implementation of that through the Army Corps of Engineers, and that is there's a Great Lakes Coastal Resilience study that they are doing, and I've been a longtime supporter of the study, and that's really there to identify those vulnerable areas that are susceptible to storms or to high water, and then recommend measures to bolster the shoreline's ability to sustain those water level conditions. So that is a huge part of this. It's something I was able to talk with on a regular basis with the Army Corps, and that is they've been responsive. I would say they haven't always viewed themselves as well. How do I put this? I'd always push them to move a little quicker than what they have, and whether it's frankly the Brandon Rhodes study on the Asian carp and invasive species situation, or whether it's this study or some of the others. You know, we've talked directly to the administration about this, advocated. I've co-sponsored legislation requiring the study to be funded, and yet it remains unfunded. And that's a key. So, in most recently, we also had something that was out of the WRDA, which is Water Resources Development Act of 2020. We're trying to streamline flood risk reduction projects, provide local communities tools to build their infrastructure back faster and more resilient, so that some of that streamlining of the permitting is happening. Taking care of rural communities, providing additional supports for their flooding issues, and specifically the legislation would allow the Corps to provide non-technical assistance for greater resilience planning, meaning they get to promote nature-based infrastructure projects, provide new authority to study, design, and construct projects, and really to help communities that have had repetitive flooding. And this is obviously everything is all interconnected, and I'm recalling the effects that we've had with Grand River flooding as it goes through Grand Haven. And I sit on the Financial Services Committee, but within our purview is something called the National Flood Insurance Program. NFIP has been a battle line that has been drawn in many, many ways. I have advocated for reforms to it. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me that there is an unlimited opportunity to have your property destroyed, and then you get to rebuild it, and it gets destroyed again, and you get to rebuild it, and it gets destroyed again, and you get to rebuild it. And the federal program with this then funds it. And we know there's a very small percentage of the actual properties that account for a massive part of the cost to this. And so whether it's things like trying to reform that, so maybe it's 3 strikes and out, like in baseball. It's you've got some opportunities here, but maybe if God and Mother Nature are telling you that it really doesn't want your structure there, maybe it's time to not have a structure there. So we've got to just think a little differently about our policies. Once something is in, it doesn't mean it has to be there in perpetuity. And I think that kind of goes to those hardened shorelines, especially in our inland lakes that are connected to the Great Lakes, and looking at how you restore some of those more natural habitats. So that there's obviously more that needs to be done. We're continuing to advocate for that, but I really want to make sure that we have cooperation at a local, state, and federal level. And unfortunately, I've been involved both at the state level as a state legislator and as a federal legislator, and it's surprising and unfortunate to see those different levels of government not always communicating, and certainly those organizations within those levels of government not always communicating.
Daniel, you are muted.
I fixed it. It gave me a warning. Kelly has a great story to tell. A terrible story to tell, really, about some of the experiences that organizations had with the pandemic. But for purposes of time, hopefully we can loop back around to that and give a few others a chance to tell their story, just to make sure that we don't run out of time. So I'd like to introduce Anna Olson, who owns Los Amigos Restaurants in Muskegon, and Destiny Keener, who owns Country Kitchen in Muskegon, who are going to tell their stories about how the pandemic has impacted their businesses and the disproportionate impacts that it's having on businesses that are owned or led by people of color. Destiny, would you like to start off?
Sure. My name is Destiny Keener Sargent. I am owner and chef for Country Cooking here located in downtown Muskegon. We've been in that location since last May. And originally our whole idea was to really get a food truck so that we could maneuver all throughout the city. But one of the things that downtown Muskegon lacked is a lot of people of color. And so it's also one of my initiatives is for equity, diversity, and inclusion in all parts of our community, because African Americans make up a good about 40 to 45% of our community. And we're very successful in being able to do that. During COVID, and we were on a really good roll. If you come into Rackett's, it is literally one of the only bars in Muskegon that is a true makeup of what this culture looks like. And when COVID hit, of course, it hit us all very hard. We didn't have the privilege or the opportunity to not stop working. We had to work because the restaurant is our total livelihood. We have 4 children, one of which is in college, one going to college, a senior, and a young child. And I just took on my niece. I'm foster parenting her now. So 5 altogether. But when COVID hit, and just to give you a little bit of background, I come from the nonprofit world. Did nonprofit since I was 14 years old, grew up in the Urban League offices. And one of the things that when the grants started coming about, one of the things I noticed first was the language in some of the grants and how difficult it was to understand some of those grants. And me coming from a nonprofit background, grants were my life. And so for me, I could understand that. But I had many people who, and for Black people, and most Black people, when we start a business, it's not because it's just something we like to do. We're just going to take a chance on it. It's because out of necessity to feed our families. A lot of drug dealers turn legit by making a very profitable business in the community and turning their lives around so they can turn their lives around for their children as well. And so I started noticing, I was asking, hey, did you apply for this grant? Did you apply for that grant? No, I didn't. It was just too hard to understand. It was too hard. Those were things I continued to hear. But then also when we started seeing the grant recipients come out, there were not a lot of us on there. I remember when I got one of the grants, I forget from who was the major fiduciary for it, but I was all of us that were in the Muskegon area were in the right place. That was our grant title, the Right Place Grant. And once I finally got to see the recipients, it blew my mind, some of the funds that went to people who they were able to close their businesses down because they had the luxury of having other income. They were able to close their businesses down just to take the time off. And some of the businesses had received numerous support from our community and from other areas. And so that just really that fueled a fire in me. And so I started connecting with the chamber, let them know how upset I was, because I have a friend who owns a beauty salon right downtown Muskegon. And it's like, she is just trying to get back into her building, and she had no support, and she was able to receive none of those grant funds. So my question is, how is the government planning to make these funds more accessible to minorities, to people of color? Is there anything that you all plan to do educationally? Any kind of mentors out there to help with the process of applying for grants? Because there were some people that were even having to pay people. And when you are already trying to make a dollar out of literally a nickel, it's difficult to even have to pay somebody $100 to do your grant. And so I'm just wondering, what is our government looked at? And these are questions I've even emailed to our governor, because I really want to know. I feel like we just continue to be on the back burner, and something has to happen to where that we can have equal access to these funds and get equal access to these awards, and also have an equal opportunity to apply. Even if we don't understand, we have people right there holding our hands to get us to where we need to go to.
Yeah, Destiny, I guess I want one clarification. You were talking about the grants. Were you talking about the Paycheck Protection Program most recently with the COVID cases, or are you talking about some of the other grants? Because I know there was some, regardless of skin color or size, there was some confusion within communities about how to access the PPP program. And so I guess that I just wanted a little clarification, because I some of the things that I can address are specifically regarding the Paycheck Protection Program and what that means for small businesses.
Both the PPP as well, for many people of color. I know Black people especially, that wasn't even an option for us, because who is trying to borrow any money when you don't even know if you're going to survive, right? And so but still, in accessing that, there was much difficulty in even figuring out how to access that. And it's like really nobody there to kind of help. We tried to help each other as best we could, but there is not a lot of mentorship when it comes to these grants. It's like I said, most of us do this out of necessity, and no one else you're not really thinking about, who to access and who has this available to access to you.
Congressman, before you answer, Anna, would you like to share some additional context to that as well?
Yes. Hi. So I am the owner of Los Amigos Mexican Restaurant. We are in the Sherman corridor, right off of the freeway.
Right by Mercy, correct?
Yes.
Like Mercy campus. Okay.
Correct.
I haven't had a chance to go to Destiny's restaurant, but I have been in yours a while back. So it snuck in and out of there.
Thank you. Well, what Destiny says, it just resounds so much, and I see that it's hard sometimes to grasp that feeling of anger and not able to do anything to help it, because in our communities, in the migrant community and in the brown community and Black communities, we don't go to business school before we open a business, right? We don't, we kind of just go with the flow and then hope that everything works well. A lot of us think that if we have a good product, that if we put our heart into it and if we work hard, we're gonna make it, which it generally works. It was working for us. It worked for Destiny and it worked for me. But when things like the pandemic happen, that we are not prepared, the government wasn't prepared, business owners are not prepared, and organizations that are supposed to support us are not prepared for that either. And then so, something that I wanted to say that I think encompasses this really well is we create as much as inequality when we treat same things different than when we treat different things the same. We, as a society, as the government, and as organizations that put out grants, we need to understand that the people that are applying are not all the same. The grants applications weren't only hard to do, but they were very time sensitive. And the one that Destiny was talking about with the right place, they flat out told us if it was something that it was missing, it was gonna be dismissed. And we didn't have any information in what we even got wrong, why we didn't qualify. And then, so for me, that's very important. When I do something wrong in my business, I'm able to get feedback from my customers. And then, so I'm able to fix whatever is wrong. So not knowing even if I made the criteria, if I was even able to qualify, it's just walking blindly. And then, so funding is paramount to all of our businesses in the United States right now. And Destiny is very, it's infuriating how a lot of the businesses, and not just here in Muskegon, but I see it, and I saw it in Holland, I'm seeing it in King County. The businesses that are getting the funding are the same ones. When you are able to FOIA or see the list of businesses that are able to access funding, it seems that there is the same name over and over. And then, so the question that Destiny had, and the same question that I have, is how do we ensure that we have an equitable distribution? The funds should acquire to the population we have in our community, and that's not happening. I'm right now finding allies, is something that we need to dance around with. I need to find people that feel the same way I feel, so I can go to people like you, like my city, the government, and any other organizations, because if I just whack myself in there and I say, I have this issue, it is very easy to get dismissed. So I'm going to my chamber, talking to them, hey, would you be my ally? Would you walk with me to the city so we talk how, all these minority-owned business were missed on funding? Or same thing with the right place. They said that there were 400 people that applied for the grant, but somehow
we're gonna let the congressman respond if that's okay.
Well, actually, I guess I've got a question, which would be the same question that I had for Destiny. I know that there's a larger issue that we have, which is access to capital. That is a key part of growth, and small businesses are that heartbeat of it. And Anna, I'll say this again, regardless of skin color, most small businesses are started by people who didn't go to business school. They are people who have a passion. There are people who have an interest. There are people who are fighting to really live a dream, and they will start those businesses and oftentimes learn as they are going through that. I watched my mom, my sister, and my brother all start their own businesses, and my sister's was the most successful after 10 or 12 years. But I saw the difficulties that she had. She didn't have a finance background. She didn't have a business degree. She had a passion and was trying to meet that need within the community. But again, back to a little bit of the issue I had asking Destiny about is, were you able to access the PPP program? I guess that would be a basic question.
Right. So I was able to access it the second time. The first time around, it was impossible. Just my bank couldn't even. I'm very local, right? If I can do a local, I do it. So I'm with the credit union that has they had no infrastructure to do that. So we weren't able to access it the first time. We did it the second time around. But if it wasn't, if they would have not passed the second time, then I would have not been able to.
So that was something that we very specifically understood. One, we included credit unions on that first wave of the PPP program. and we discovered that they were not prepared. They as you point out properly, they did not have the infrastructure or the experience on how to do it. And yes, those timelines were very tight. And there was a number of us that were trying to talk to both the Treasury Department, Secretary Mnuchin, and others that were implementing the program. And in what I believe was the fourth coronavirus package, after, as you may recall, part of the reason why some of those timelines were so tight on the PPP program was that money was gone. That first initial $350 billion, and it primarily did go to small and medium-sized businesses. In fact, you were limited as to no more than 500 employees. You had certain caps and those things. But in that next wave, when we added an additional $310 billion for that second wave, it was to make sure that more people like yourself were accessing it, because you should have been able to. It was the intention to do that on the first round. Specifically, there was $60 billion of that was set aside to go through small local community banks and credit unions, so that it wasn't the large or even the regional banks. So, for example, Huntington Bank has the largest small business, the SBA lending program in the state of Michigan. They were able to get a huge number of their customers into that PPP program because they had that infrastructure. And I'm not sure which of the credit unions that you were with up in Muskegon, but many of them didn't have any of that expertise, didn't have that infrastructure, but they were able to learn through that. And so by having both this $60 billion set aside geared towards that, plus the additional opportunity to go in and capture businesses like yourself and making sure that you had that opportunity, that was one of the ways of trying to address that. Beyond that is specifically with the PPP program. By the way, I should tell you and Destiny and anybody else who is a small business owner, there is discussion of additional dollars being used, and some of them may be dollars that were not that were allocated towards the PPP program but haven't been used yet. That there may be an additional round for additional funding. There's probably going to be some sort of threshold of looking at a 50% reduction in revenue, for example. That's not the number that's been negotiated out, but that's been a number that's been talked about. But really trying to make sure that those smaller businesses that have been highly impacted, and frankly, both you and Destiny with restaurants, and especially along with hospitality, has just been devastated because you now suddenly have maybe half the capacity of what you previously had for seating. You can only do so much takeout, right? I mean, there's those structural barriers that aren't a finance structure. They're now a county health department structure that is going to limit some of that ability for you to recapture your business. But so we're working on those things. But more broadly, CDFIs, which are community development financial institutions. There's one based in Grand Rapids that covers, I forget exactly how many counties, but I believe the Muskegon County and Ottawa County are covered by the Kent County CDFI, and it is specifically geared towards trying to make sure that minority-owned businesses, women-owned businesses have access to capital, and that is some direction that we are continuing to have the conversations. How do we build those organizations up? And there's a lot of bipartisan support for that, by the way. That is something that is important. Now, we may not be hitting the mark. That's why conversations like this are important. And I'd like to circle back with you and with Destiny to get a better understanding of your businesses, better understanding of what you have done and what you've had to go through to get where you're currently at. But as we look at some of the regulations that surround banks and what they are required to do within their communities, we also know that we have small businesses that are getting loans and are having financial interactions with financial institutions that don't have a quote bank building or a credit union building. They may be all online. And how do you make sure that access is happening? How do you make sure that people who are doing a lot more of their banking online, that's reflected within those communities where they're doing that business? They may not have a physical building presence, but they do have a financial presence, and making sure that they are paying attention to those communities is something that we've got a couple of bills that we've been trying to work on some reform of those. So right place. I know Muskegon Chamber, all of the chambers that I've been involved with and engaged with would love to work with you and with Destiny and people like you to further better understand what they need to do to serve you as members of the community, because you are vital to the health of those communities.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I think I should note, because there was a lot of talk about how accessing resources was difficult for all businesses, that we have documented disproportionate impacts to businesses of color, though we do certainly recognize that every business is struggling. Do you have a hard stop at 3:30?
I do. I didn't even look at. Oh, we're at 3:31. I do have another. We're kind of going back to back here, so I've got maybe 2 or 3 more minutes, and then I am gonna need to scoot.
Well, I'd like to kick it over to Brittany Good, and I think these would be just kind of like some final remarks to, if you don't mind, Brittany, and just to highlight how important sustainability is to Grand Haven area businesses.
Yes, thank you for having me. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, awesome. So I work for Aldea Coffee, and we're just a small coffee company that started as a nonprofit. We source coffee from Honduras, and we bring it up here. We roast in Muskegon Heights, and then we have a cafe in both Muskegon and in Grand Haven. Over the past couple of years, I've been working on the sustainability piece for our business, kind of championing all of the projects, and that's including composting, recycling, sourcing, and just community engagement in general. I would say that's probably the biggest piece for the role that Aldea played during the pandemic for our communities in our cafes in both Muskegon and Grand Haven, was just honestly being there, crying with one another, being able to hold people like Anna and Destiny who are having a hard time figuring things out and just don't really know where to go. So that's the biggest piece that we did, I think, during the pandemic, just being a support system. Sustainability wise, the parts I'd really like to focus on in the future is recycling and commercial composting, and really getting the areas surrounding Grand Haven cleaned up a little bit. The beach is really probably one of the biggest tourist beaches in the entire state, and it's just really struggling right now. We had a conversation with the Visitors Bureau recently, and it just sounds like people just aren't bringing their trash home from the beach, and figuring out what kind of campaign that could be that we could actually promote a lot, maybe alongside the Pure Michigan campaigns or in our individual cities, trying to help people remember, just bring your stuff home with you and stop leaving it on the beach. Would be really helpful. Really concerned for sure about the amount of small plastics that are being utilized during a pandemic. We're using to-go supplies more and more and more, and so that is probably my main concern as far as the environment and climate change right now. Just trying to make sure that we're using the highest quality to-go stuff that we can, but we've definitely gone through a significant more amounts of those. And our main question for you coming out of this section is, What role do you believe the federal government should take in promoting resiliency and sustainability on the lakeshore?
Yeah, that's a lot wrapped up all in that. So,
Yeah.
you know, and again, I guess this is, Brittany, this is part of where, one, we as citizens need to go and become patrons of those places that share the values and the importance of what we believe in. And so whether it is, I have one of my favorite coffee shops just down from my house is Simpatico. It's two of them here in Holland. Similar story to what you're explaining and what you do, and where they source their coffee and making sure that there's it's sustainably done and that it's a fair trade, fair price. Where this intersection is really, again, at that local, state, and federal government level. Oftentimes you will see grant monies that go in for educational purposes into states. Typically they wouldn't go into a local government, but they would go into a state government, much like our friend on the call from the Michigan Health and Human Services. You know, that's a CDC grant that's actually funding his paycheck and funding what he is doing. So most often you will see the federal government put together some sort of grant program that they then give to the state for the state to administer. So what I guess what I would do is make sure that you're connected in with your state rep and your state senators that in both of those areas, and talk to them about what opportunities there might be. I know when I was in the state legislature, we did a lot of work with local governments about grant opportunities. We would work with our federal partners to understand what those grant opportunities may be coming into the state. I have somebody on my staff, Heather Sandberg, who is my deputy chief, and she's based in Michigan, who does. She works on those issues. She'd be happy to work with the city of Grand Haven, the city of Muskegon Heights. And by the way to go! I'm glad you're in the Heights, trying to rebuild that base. I mean, it always strikes me. I was just at City Hall. The weeks kind of blend together in the COVID region, but it was maybe a month and a half ago when I was at City Hall and met with the mayor, and you look at what Muskegon Heights is doing, and they're adding solar panels onto their municipal buildings. We were there. I got to help throw the switch that allowed for some of that power to come back in, and really it's going to end up saving the local government a lot of money. But you look at what that glory of what Muskegon Heights was at one time, and where that has gone. And I just commend people like you coming back in and saying, hey, you know what? Not on our watch. We want to be a part of the solution, not part of the problem. We want to build this back up to what we know its potential is, what we know the opportunity is there for so many, and that's phenomenal. So what I'm getting out of this is I have at least one coffee shop I got to go to, and definitely 2 restaurants. And for Anna and for Destiny, I'm gonna want to get your best dish when I'm there. But I would like to continue that conversation in that kind of setting on your turf as well.
And thank you for your time today, Congressman. We did have a number of questions that we didn't have time to, especially related to.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, and I just got a text from Palmer, who's on the call, and I completely missed this one. I forgot about this. The Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, just West Michigan, the MAC Tower Area Coordinating Council here based in Holland, just got a $171,000 grant for trash pickup on the lakeshore. So they it's not just Holland. They have a wider area, but we ought to make sure that we're talking to organizations, those regional groups and organizations to make sure that they are applying for those grants as well. So there was one that I had missed and I'd forgotten about, but that $171,000 to do exactly what Brittany was talking about.
Great. And that sounds like it'd be an exciting project that the MAC is working on.
Yeah.
Thank you for your time today. That is, I know you have a hard stop, and that's all the time that we do have. There were a number of questions that we didn't have a chance to ask, specifically related to how the pandemic and extreme weather issues are impacting food systems and agriculture on the lakeshore. And we're hopeful that we can loop back with you at some point in the near future to continue that discussion.
Yeah, and actually my entire day yesterday was spent in Shelby, Free Soil, Scottville, talking to those food producers and talking from both the processors as well as the growers, everything from labor issues to water issues and processing the products that are getting grown here in West Michigan. And so that is definitely front and center for our discussions internally as an office as well. So. Well, Daniel, I appreciate the opportunity of being with everybody, and sorry for those folks that weren't able to get those questions answered. But I'm now officially 10 minutes behind for my next meeting. I'm sorry about that, but we'll make sure we stay in touch.
All right, thank you so much.
All right, thanks.
Thank you, everyone. As mentioned, we'll continue this conversation next week, Tuesday, with congressional candidate Hillary Skolton and Senator Debbie Stabenow. And we're hopeful to loop back with many of the people in this group in the near future here, as we didn't get a chance to talk about everything that we'd hoped be able to talk about. Thank you again to all of our panelists, Brittany, Kathy, Kelly, Marty, Marta, and Marta, who are still on the call today, as well as Anna and Destiny and Roger, who I think are still on, but I just can't see their videos. Apologies to those who didn't have time to. We will be looking back to that as soon as we're able to get it scheduled. And thank you everyone for participating in our forum today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dan.
And we'll learn from how to schedule this a little better next time. So. Thank you so much, Rose, and I'm going to end this at your leisure.